Is this a joke or something?" The voice, sharp and full of the Britley, a man who was in charge, was angry. Being publicly cut down, cut through the air in the afternoon was humid. Mark Reading, the lead project engineer, yelled at him, clapped his hands. Together, in a dramatic way to close his laptop, caused a lot of people jump. A restoration worth millions of dollars, a 10,000 VIPs waiting, and this 10,000 the ton of scrap won't even hiss. Hestered at the huge black engine as if it had deceived him personally. The Union Pacific big boy number 414 was sitting not, moving or making noise during the Saramana track. A pile of frigid steel that was meant to be the winnerth most important. Part of the railway heritage celebration was a monument to his failure. His group of younger engineers, all dressed in neat matching polo shirts with the company's emblem on them, looked at each other nervously. They played around in their tablets, doing diagnostic, came back with green tick markings and readings that are annoyingly hopeful. Based on their data, the machine was just right, but it wouldn't build pressure from the steam. In its own shell, it was a ghost in its own shell, standing right behind Thethan, velvet rope that kept Thethy technical area from the gathering audience. A man in his 80s watched. Arthur Corian, 89 years old, stood still and quiet. It appeared to soak up the frenzied energy all around him. His back was a little bit thunched down because of his age, but his eyes were clear and sharp. They weren't gazing at Theloptops or the worried looks of the crew. They were stuck on the engine, a long, knowing look that was less of and more of a communion. Then an observation. Stayed still, with his hands resting lightly on the old leather strap on the bag. His calm was thrown over his shoulder, very different from the growing panic. A youthful and eager security guard. Make the angry project lead. Happy came up to him. "Sir, you need to step Arthur," said back. "This is a restricted area." Didn't take his eyes from the quiet train engine. Guard was taken not by what was spoken, but by Thethy complete assurance with which they were said. Mark Reading heard Thee said something and put a mask over his face, of anger. "Can you feel her pulse? What are you? You some type of train whisperer? Step back, old friend. We really do have an engineers working on this. Train fans who are sentimental." Arthur finalized his head and looked at Mark's. His eyes didn't show any animosity. They only showed profound, tired patience. "I'm simply saying," he started. But Mark stopped him. Don't care what you're saying. This is not a horse, but a complicated piece of machinery. It works on thermodynamics, on not feelings, but precision engineering." Amada contemptuous gesture at Arthur. "Get him back even more. Security. We don't need the responsibility. The fight and the fact that it became worse became the main event." At first, the crowd was bored, and now had a focus. For their attention, their focus. The drama was over, about the train that stopped. It was a Booth, proud young engineer, and the silent old man he was trying to make feel bad. Mark would say something every 5 minutes. A new theory, a new try. They tree-dressed in the electrical ignition system. They tried to reset these answers that measure pressure. They looked at the fuel lines that were clean and injectors that were perfect. Every time they tried, they were met with the same deep, steely stillness from the big guy. The sun was hot. Devips in the grandstand were waving their hands with their own programs. And the local news team had set up a live feed, putting the photo together to show there is a smoldering tension near the rope line, sir. "I won't ask you again," the guard remarked, and his voice was no firm, with his hand close to his belt. "Please go back behind the main barrier." Arthur sighed, sounded like dried leaves moving quickly across the pavement. He peered past the guard and Mark and gazing at the huge driving wheels of that train engine, each one taller than a person. He said softly, "That's a G2 injector valve," nearly to himself. "They constantly stay in heat if the order isn't quite right." "Yes. You have to bleed the extract you first. Before you do anything, give her a drink. Tell her to run." Mark, who had been trying to make sense of the issue to Eamon, in a suit with an angry look on his face, heard this and ran back over. "G2. The G2 valve is not on the diagram. We added this to it after the fact, An FE controller that is up to date. Everything's done automatically. He laughed. A quick bark. Sound that isn't funny. Where did you go? Ever heard that word? Some old dusty book. Pointed a finger in a rude way. At the leather bag Arthur had. What do you have in there? You're a collection. Of train schedules from the 1950s. The insult was still there. The people was quiet and watchful. The news camera got closer. Arthur's grip on the strap on his bag. He didn't answer. He only looked at Mark, his sewn expression illegible, calm, lake showing a stormy sky. The young engineer saw nothing but hostility. From a well-dude with a scene, he didn't notice the flash of memory in Arthur's eyes, a ghost from a different time and place, where that particular bag was a lifeline. The leather on the satchel was broken and old and dark. The brass clasps turned into a dull bronze. As Mark made fun of it, the present seemed tow for a moment. Everything around Arthur seemed to disappear. The smell of scorching asphalt and being in a hurry, the strong metallic smell replaced the scent. Smell of coal, smoke, and terror. This is 1944. The air in the little locomotive cab is thick and cold. Outside the Ardennes woodland is a black and white landscape fear in a thin sliver of moonlight. Arthur, a lot younger man with the same stidius, takes this very bag from a tiny metal locker. His face is dirty with dirt and soot. The far-off crumping sound of artillery fire is the only part of the rhythm section for the engines. Chugging heartbeat hoarders. This is not the 414. It's Onaf, its sisters, racing dark. A ghost train on a secret mission to get more supplies 101st Airborne under siege. He starts bag. Inside, tucked away, a Monjamatics wrapped up in a driver's log, heavy hand-forged wrench, is a book. At the surface is rough and shows the hammer signs of its making. It's his most vital instrument, the only thing that can manually turn off the frozen injectors in this bitterly chilly weather. The bag is an AA bag for a hobbyist. It's his moment of war toolbox, a remnant of survival. The memory disappeared as fast as it came. He wasped back in the hot, stifling heat. Of the Mark reading sneering at the festival face just a few inches from his own, the engineer spotted an old man with a worn-out bag. The audience during that short flash now knew what they were looking at, more than that. They just didn't know. What? While the public shame was at its highest point, a distinct kind of there. Was action going on at the edge of Thepapow? Sarah Jenkins is a junior. Curator came from the Railway Museum and had seen the whole thing happen with an increasing feeling of worry. Not like the SG. Wasn't a technician, but she was an engineer. She was a historian, and she knew something about the way the old man was standing. The exact, almost holy way hestered at the train engine. It was the look of a master artisan, not just a fan. She had heard the guard say Arthur Corian's name while the name Arthur Corian when he was sending a radio message for help. While Mark was yelling at Arthur about the Sarah had quietly imagined the G2 valve, took her phone out. This word meant nothing to the engineers. But to a historian who had been excavating for months, searching the archives for this very exhibition, it sounded a bell. It was an old-fashioned word from the original designs that haven't been changed. A simple search for the Arthur Corian Union Pacific didn't say anything new. Boucher got a hit when she added Wartime. A own digitized newspaper. Article from a military logbook from 1946. It was dry, technical bit concerning logistics new ideas in the European theater of factions. Concentrating on the extraordinary well midnight supply train's work. The article talked about a special made, a change that wasn't typical to a few big boy engines for clandestine actus. And it quoted a youthful chief engineer, a CWO, Arthur Corin, on the difficulties of managing the huge locomotives in the dark. Her breath stuck in her throat. Boss warrant officer, a living Primarosaurus, was right there, being treated like a trespasser who was lost. Hertha Museum's boss, Mr. Davenport, director, was wringing his hands nearby. His face was pale as he observed. His event that would define his career fell apart. Surrealized, he was too scared to hear a suspicion from a junior staff member. She need dead-do go over his head. She got away from the main group, her heart racing. She looked through her contacts. Going around the museum's line of command, I got the private number of a moleculed Richards, who was a senior vice president at the headquarters office of Union Pacific. The main office is in Omaha. He was a well-known history enthusiast. The one who had personally gave the expensive big guy the go-ahead fixing. It was a hugger professional risk, but the unfairness shoeless, seeing things that made her fear go away. She discovered a peaceful place behind a generatorant, made the call. This is Mr. Richards. Sarah Jenkins works with the Western Rail Heritage Museum. She started, her voice a little shaky. I'm really sorry to bother you, sir, but I'm at the celebration. The 44 is stuck. I'm fine, Miss Jenkins. I'm aware. The voice on the other end was cut off and chilly. I'm watching it on a live stream.
My boss of engineering is acting like a fool throughout the whole firm. Sir, that's why I'm phoning. There is a man here. They are attempting to get rid of him. He's been trying to let them know what's wrong with the engine. Arthur Corian is his name. She stopped for a moment, then jumped. He claims it's a G2 injector valve that was stuck. There was a deep hush on the other end of the queue line. Sarah believed for a second that he had put down. Then the voice came back. Changed totally. The annoying cold was gone, and an electric shock took its place. What did you say his name was? Corian. Arthur Corian. The queue went quiet again, but this time she could hear the frenetic clicking of a keyboard. Richards murmured, "My God, Mr. Jenkins, don't let that man go. Don't let anyone touch him. I'm on my way." The call terminated without warning. Sarah glanced at her phone, a flood of adrenaline rushing through her. The horseman was on its way. The scene changed to a large corner office on the top floor of Union, Omaha, Nebraska's Pacific Tower. The panoramic window looked out over the city, but the guy on the leather chair didn't see the view. James Richards, who is the senior vice president of operations, looked at the screen of his computer, his face pale. He had just hung off the phone with the youthful curator. "Get me General Madsen right away." He yelled into his phone at Stratcom intercom, his voice tense with an emotion that his staff had never heard before, and grabbed the company helicopter. Ready to go. Cheyenne is the destination. He was now looking at a new, declassified file on internal staff, marked with the highest level of security. The corporation had clearance. The black and white picture revealed a young man in his 20s with a dirty face, with grease, a determined look on his jaw. The name was Arthur M. Corian, Chief Warrant Officer in the U.S. Army, attached to the Transportation Corps. The service record was short but quite impressive. Ghost Train Division's Chief Engineer. European Theater 1943 to 1945 in charge. Secret nighttime train operations to help the front line. Battle groups. Given credit for successful delivery of important law during the Battle of the Bulge. Under very harsh conditions, they were experts in changes to the field that aren't standard. 4000 class train engine. Richards read the last phrase, a direct quote from Corian's commanding officer in his after-action report. Mr. Corian does not run a engine. He talks to it. He kept them alive when they should have been dead. Should have been frozen trash. Richards grabbed his coat and ran, his head whirling. Valve for the G2 injector. It was a war zone. Change, a manual bypass was put in place to deal with fuel breakdown in severe. It's cold. It wasn't on any recent diagram, since it was never meant to be there. Officially, it was a secret that only to a small number of males, most of whom were long since deceased. They weren't just dealing with an engine that won't start. They were defiling a living monument in front of the person who made it. Arthur Corian wasn't only a driver in the past. He was a hero of Really important secret. And the world was about to find out. Back at the Mark on the sun-baked festival grounds. Readings patience had now run out. Gone totally. The public. Failure, the never-ending questioning from the news, and the quiet, constant. The old man being there had pushed him over the edge. He thought of Arthur as the main thing that made him feel bad. A living. The manifestation of old-world wisdom. That was making him an adept in modern things. Seemed dumb. He walked over to Arthur. His face turned red with anger as he jabbed pointing a finger at the old man. That's it. I've had enough of you and your senile ramblings, he snarled loud enough for everyone to hear. So that everyone, including the news camera, can hear clearly. You are a problem and a public nuisance. He looked at the two security guards who had been watching close by. I want him gone, not simply. I want him to leave behind the barrier. The premises. He is now officially trespassing and getting in the way of trains. He leaned in close to operations. Arthur's voice dropped to a poisonous. You wanted to be a part of the show me, old man. How's this? Well, provide you a police escort. He made his public voice sound better. Coming back. If he doesn't want to, have him jailed. A night in jail might help. Cleanse his mind. It was the best overreach. A last, irreversible act of. The crowd gasped at the arrogance. The guards stared at each other. Their faces were ambiguous. They had not crowd control but taking an old man into custody on the orders of a crazy engineer. One of them took a step forward with some hesitation and put a hand on Arthur's arm. Sir, you heard. Arthur, you need to come with us. He didn't fight back, he just glanced at the hand on his arm, then back to Mark. His one of deep expression. Disappointment. It was at that exact the moment of truth, the moment of indignity, a new sound came in. It began as a low, repetitive beating, a sound that made the chest feel full. As heard with the ears. It got bigger quickly. A beat that hit hard and cut through the uncomfortable hush. Every head in the crowd, everyone, including Mark's, turned and gazed up. A sleek black helicopter was coming down. Quickly, with its company logo shining brightly. The sun. It wasn't going to the local airfield. It was going straight for a big expanse of grass that has been cleared just beyond the train tracks. At the same time, a group of 3 black SUVs sped by with their tinted windows, which hid the people inside. Windows that were tinted to hide the people within sped down a service road, making a plume of dust. They didn't use sirens, but lights that blinked in their grills, made their way through with quiet urgency. Authority. The mob, feeling a sudden changed the course of the day and left, instinctively, making a wide path from the SUVs and the stopped train. The helicopter landed with ease. Elegance, its rotors making a maelstrom of dust and grass. The side door opened, and a man named James in a neat suit. Richards jumped out before the blades had even stopped spinning, ducking his head and walking forward with unwavering purpose. The doors of the SUVs opened up, and more men in suits came out. Suit-wearing men appeared on either side of Richards, but it were the 2 men that came out of the lead vehicle caught everyone's attention. They were both dressed in full military gear. One was a decorated Air Force officer in a uniform. Colonel, the other was tall and straight. Straight, wore the 2 silver stars of a Major General on his shoulders. The show reached the 8-minute point of the public suffering, and the reward was. James Richards walked up to the start of, past the shocked workers at the event, past the Mark reading, who was open-mouthed, and made a direct cue for the one person in the entirely wild scenario that stayed. He halted just in front of him and stood very still. In front of Arthur Corian, whose arm remained under the soft grip of the security. Mr. Richards said, "Corian." Voice full of a distinction that was completely confusing to the people watching. "James Richards, Union Pacific. It's an honor that I can hardly put into words." The colonel and the major general stepped up. Next to Richards. They came to a sharp stopped together. Then, in a motion of. They were flawless in every way, with sharp, synchronized movements. Both of them raised their right hands to their brows, giving a perfect military salute to the bent-over old man in the. A wave of complete silence washed over the 1,000-strong. There was stillness among the 1,000 people. Mob. The security guard grabbed pulled her hand back from Arthur's arm as it had been destroyed. Cell phones that were now recording the shame, raised to catch this moment of stunning and inexplicable respect. The general held his salute and looked straight ahead. On Arthur's chief warrant officer. "Corian," he continued, his voice clear. Commanding baritone that didn't need any amplification. "General Madsen, U.S. Strategic Command. For the sake of I am a member of the United States Armed Forces. A great honor to finally see you in a way that is appropriate for your service." Richard stepped up and took a portable microphone from one of his aides, his voice now louder boomed throughout the festival grounds. "For those. If you're wondering what you are seeing," he started, looking around over the crowd and then landing squarely on Mark Reading. "You are seeing a debt of honor being paid. Arthur, this man, Corian, is more than just a rail fan. He was the chief in the winter of 1944, engineer for a top-secret army group called as the Ghost Train Division. The crowd gasped all at once. He and his team ran these huge boys." Richards went on to say, pointing to the quiet giant through enemy land at night with no lighting, frequently under direct fire, to bring soldiers, gasoline, and weapons to They were the invisible front lines. The European campaign's lifeline. It was one of his engines, number 414, has been put on hold today since it has unique, undocumented changes that Mr. Corian himself designed in the field to keep it going. In the worst possible situations, changes are known as modern schematics. He stopped for a moment, letting settle down after hearing the news. He wasn't being a bother, he was attempting to help. He was the only one who could do this. The muttering of the entire continent who could turned into a clamor of people. Cheers and applause. The news camera that had been on the fight immediately panned to show the faces in the crowd. Faces of wonder and shame for their prior judgment, of national pride. Mark Reading stood still, the color drained from his face. He looked like, even if the ground had barely disappeared under his feet. The story was no longer a secret. Not a secret anymore. It was now known by all. A fact that can't be denied, shown live for the. General Madsen bowed his head for the world to see. He saluted and turned, and his eyes fell on Mark Reading. He didn't speak out. He didn't have to. His remarks were soft, chilly, and he felt the weight of his rank. In the seriousness of the moment. "Your diagnostic tools are for machines, son." He whispered the word son, and it landed like a. That train is not a physical blow. A piece of equipment. It is a monument. It is a veteran, just like the man who led it. You were trying to tell it what to do. Make it submit with the technology. It only works when it gets a request from a long-lost pal. The scolding was professional, exact, and completely very bad. It wasn't a fit of rage. It was a clinical evaluation of failure, given in public. Mark stammered his business talk and technical language. He lost all faith in himself. I didn't know, sir. I'm so sorry. Arthur, who had seen the whole thing, talked to him in his usual calm, gentle way. Put a hand on the general's unformed arm. He's a young man who is in a hurry. In general. We were all young and in a one time in a hurry. The gesture was graceful. Amazing. Then he turned his soft eyes to Mark. She's not simply a steel and fire person, he remarked softly, pointing to the enormous. Hey there. She remembers things. All of these old engines do. You need to pay attention to what. Not just tell her what you want. You were trying to push the front door, but all she needed was for someone to use the key from before. He took off his took the leather bag from his shoulder. The crowd watched in silence, waiting. He unfastened the faded brass buckles and put their hand inside. He moved slowly and on purpose. He went around the old log, texts and plans, and his hand closed around a dark, hefty piece of metal. He took it out. It was the wrench made by hand. While he was holding it, sunlight shone off of its uneven surface that has been pounded. The world went away in a moment. Again, replaced by a recollection as crisp as shattered glass. A night that was very cold in the Ardens. The 414 is stuck, and its injector Q frozen hard. The world is outside. A lot of snow and gunfire. A young sergeant, a blacksmith from Ohio, gave him this wrench barely a week earlier, made from the armor that was saved. Piece of a broken Sherman tank. 4. When the tools in the plant aren't good enough. He had said art. Now, with his knuckles already bloody from the cold in the Arthur fits the wrench to the metal that won't budge, onto a certain hard-to-find nut on the housing for the injector. He puts everything he has. Groans that reverberate as he puts his weight onto it. The injured men's groans in the automobiles behind him. The valve comes loose. The steam makes a hissing sound. The train is safe. The mission is safe. The wrench was the key. Arthur headed towards the quiet. The train, with the crowd moving out of the way. Like water. He didn't get into a computerized cab in current times. He moved along the big frame to a little dirty, an access panel below the driver's side. Panel that the engineering team had thrown out as no longer useful. He knelt, his old joints hurting, protesting, and made the one-of-a-kind handmade head of the wrench onto a concealed bolt head that is sunken. Years of dirt. With a lifetime of. He used his established knowledge to provide the wrench. A strong quarter turned to the left. There was a strong resonant thud from the heart of the engine, a sound of release of the system falling into place. It was a fantastic thing happened a second later. Quivering gasp of pure white steam that came out of the cylinders in waves. A strong rumble started to grow up from deep inside the boiler. The big kid, was alive after hours of stony silence. Spontaneous, happy cheers broke out from the throng, a surge of noise that washed. During the whole festival, Arthur pushed himself up and patted the the engine steel as if it were the side of a horse you can trust. Mr. Richards. His eyes were full with sorrow as he ran to his side. Mr. Corian, Arthur, will you please do us the honor? Will you take her on a ride? Arthur gazed up at the cab and then at the multitude of people cheering and delivered a polite, silent yes. The effects of that day were quick and clear-cut. The next day, Union Pacific made a formal public apology to Arthur Corian, which was sent by news organizations all throughout the country. But they went even further. James Richards made the announcement of the Arthur. The Corian Wartime Railman Initiative is a program that is completely funded and dedicated to keeping old engines in good shape. The job was to mix current restoration techniques with the priceless hands-on methods with the priceless hands-on knowledge of the few veterans that are still alive, operators, making sure their wisdom would never be forgotten or ignored again. Mark Reading did not get fired. Instead, Arthur specifically asked for him to be made the first person to sign up for the new program. The end of the public show was a lot more private and quiet event. Mark drove his automobile along the road 2 weeks later, a peaceful, tree-lined lane in the suburbs, and parked in front of a small, well-kept bungalow. He walked up the path with not a diagnostic tool or a tablet, but an empty notebook and a pen. He was not in his business polo shirt, but in a simple t-shirt and jeans. He called the doorbell. Arthur Corian replied, and a cup of coffee in hand. He looked at the young engineer on his porch, and a real smile crossed his lips. Mr. Corian, Mark said, his voice low and honest. I know I shouldn't. I was just curious whether you'd be ready to give me some stories about about the large guy. Arthur glanced at the young man at the notepad and saw not the proud engineer from the festivity, but a student who wants to learn. He could see what would happen to his legacy in the future. He stepped back and opened the door. More space. I thought you'd never ask, he said. Come on in, the coffee is fresh. Arthur Corian and his story. The Ghost Train is a strong reminder. It shows us that real expertise isn't always on a computer screen, and that the most wisdom is usually found waiting for us to be humble in silence, enough to pay attention. If you were moved by wonderful story of modest valor, please like this video, share it with a friend, and sign up for Old Man Stories to get more amazing stories that you won't find not somewhere else.